I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you all for listening. I realized when my daughter was saying the word the other day into the microphone and I was telling her to slow down, I think she's actually, so like, obviously she invented the word. And I think SLEERICKETS is actually my corruption of her corruption of secrets, because I added a syllable in order to make it more auditorily legible. SLEERICKETS, whereas I think what she was actually saying was SLEERICKETS. Like she added an L and then she inverted the R and the C. So instead of secrets or SLEERICKETS, it was SLEERICKETS. SLEERICKETS. I can't say it, but I think so. I think at any rate, I think the name of the show has been mispronounced and misspelled all along, and I will have to go about redressing that error. Thank you all for listening, and thanks especially to any of you who have taken a moment sometime this week to recommend the show to a friend. You will have a chance maybe to do that you've always had a chance to do it in person because you live in person, but I'm going to be as this is playing, I will be in New York City, in Brooklyn, seeing some of the lovely people I know who live there, including hoping to see any number of you. So please do come if you are willing and able to Dick and Jane's Cocktail Bar on Adelphi Street in Brooklyn the evening of Wednesday the 20th. My guess is we will show up there around dinner time. Does that seem reasonable? And then particularly because with modest expectations, we have not made any official arrangements. So especially if more than, say, 3 of us show up, let's really make a point of being super nice to the staff. Like, let's just be so nice to the people who work there, since they will be tolerating our no doubt insufferable presence. Thanks also to all of you who listen to the secret show, the SLEERICKET show. If you like SLEERICKETS, you have listened to the back catalog, you've run out, you feel like you'd like more, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com. You can sign up for 3 extra episodes a month and some stickers. Hey, if you come to Dick and Jane's Cocktail Bar, I'm saying the full thing because I know there are other ones and I don't want to confuse anyone. I will have some stickers there too. So you can hit me up there, but you can also sign up for the secret show, get some stickers, join the Substack chat, and who knows what else. If you are interested, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com, put your email address into the slot, and I will give you a week's access to the secret show archives and subscribe your feed for free. So you can listen to any of the 55 episodes up there now, as well as, again, 3 more coming every month. Thank you all, and I do really hope I will be seeing some of you very soon, like in person. That would be great. I will do my best to make conversation and not retreat to the corner with the book I will doubtless have brought as a security blanket. So Elijah recently challenged Alice and me to a poem writing, not a contest. I mean, I guess it's always a contest because poets are always competitive, but he challenged us to write a poem about, I think, so he wrote a poem, I think it's titled To My Artist Friends, or at least the draft I read had that title. And I thought, like, I kind of want to write a poem to my artist friends. So he said, all right, you should do it. Alice is going to do it too. And then we'll all get together and talk about them, which sounded terrifying. Alice, being Alice, banged out a gorgeous drunken sonnet one night in the middle of a hen party, like 3 days after Elijah had issued this challenge. And I have since then written 5 poems, all attempting to approach this topic and all falling pretty revoltingly short. I don't think it made it into the final cut, but I had a little brief conversation with Taylor Bias about types of formal poets. And my kind of theory is there are basically like 3 types of formal poets. There are the puzzle solvers. I think of this as being like, Greg Williamson is like a classic example. That's where Taylor Bias categorizes herself. Dr. Bias calls herself a puzzle solver. That's what most excites her about writing poetry in form. And I think there are a lot of poets like that. I think John Hollander may have been like that. There are poets who have a little bit of that in them, but maybe you're not driven exclusively by that imperative. So they're the puzzle solvers. There are what I think of as the natural rhymers, which is really just kind of a shorthand way of saying like people who seem to have an almost magical knack for thinking in verse. And I don't mean that these people don't work hard, but they seem to have the sinews of their poems come together with what seems to be an impulsive grace. And in particular, they're able to produce in short order rhymes that are both surprising and delightful. I think Alice is a natural rhymer. Like I know she's relatively new to form, and she has spoken often about how difficult it is. But I think she may have that. She may just have that knack. I think Ryan is a natural rhymer as well, at least based on my experience with him. And then there's the third category, which is the tawdry laborers, and that's where I categorize myself. This is people who just really like pretty sounds and don't have a special ability for putting them together, but like them a lot and care about them and just hammer away in my case, often hammering away at many drafts of, not even the same poem revised, but many attempts at least at just like getting something off the ground, and then find something that seems salvageable and chip away at it for months and years, which is the timeline I'm on for pretty much all of my poem publications. So I am slow, and not because I am a secretive genius, but just because I think I don't really have any particular knack for it. I just really, really like it, and I am patient. So those are my categories. I don't know where Elijah is yet. I wonder if there is a sort of a moral equivalent of a puzzle solver, because if so, that might be his particular angle. I'm not sure though. At any rate, Elijah has a perfectly good poem. Alice has a lovely little surprising poem that, as I said, she seemed to produce. I'm sure she worked at it more than it appears, but she seemed to produce in appallingly little time. Again, drunk at a hen party. I have made very little headway with all of that, but I have had some thoughts about being a poet lately. So I had a brief off-mic conversation with Elijah about, he's got a real bone in his throat about confessionalism. And I'm not a confessional partisan, and I have plenty of misgivings about it as a movement or tendency. And I don't know that anyone's really nailed down a definition, but I do think there is a kind of neo-confessionalism, or maybe it's it's a different slice of confessionalism that seems to be one of the prevailing modes of poetry right now. But I kind of challenged him on this question, because whenever I hear somebody speak ill of confessional poetry, I always feel implicated, because I write dramatic monologues. I write plenty of poems that are not about me or that are explicitly in someone else's voice. But I also write poems drawn from my own life. And Elijah said there was a difference between an autobiographical poem and a confessional poem. I don't totally know what that difference is. I mean, maybe it's just one of degree and not of kind, but that seems kind of unsatisfying. Maybe the difference is that in the confessional poem, the actual content of the life is what produces the lyric effect, whereas in an autobiographical poem, the lyric effect is produced by a combination of music, argument, and rhetoric, but the actual really having happenedness of the life events is less significant. I mean, that seems like a possible distinction of category rather than merely of degree, but I don't know. I'm not totally satisfied, and it's gotten me thinking. So I read recently the collected John Berryman. I've been thinking about Andre Hewlett, who is a big John Berryman fan. The collected John Berryman, weirdly, as I'm sure Andre knows, is compiled without the dream songs. So you get all of the collected Berryman, but no dream songs, which is just such a bizarre choice. I mean, I guess it's like the dream songs are clearly his best known work, and there is a nice, handsome FSG standalone volume of the dream songs, which includes both 77 dream songs and then the dream songs that appeared in subsequent books. But it just feels like doing a complete works of William Shakespeare without the tragedies or comedies, which is to say, like, there's still tons of remarkable work. I mean, Shakespeare and Berryman don't really compare, but like, you would still have the histories and the romances and the sonnets and the other occasional lyric poems, but like, you would sort of be missing like the main event. So the collected Berryman Sans Dream Songs is a weird book to read. It's also a little bit, so he published work out of order, and then it is collected in a different but also not chronological order in the collected. And so you end up getting a kind of a funny portrait of this perpetual adolescent. I read a couple years ago Berryman's his ex-wife, his unwidowed ex-wife, I don't know, his ex-wife, who was still very close to him when he killed himself, Eileen Simpson, who wrote a really wonderful, just purely delicious memoir called Poets in Their Youth that is largely about Berryman as well as Lowell, with some notable cameos from Randall Terrell and Delmore Schwartz and Saul Bellow, among others. So in that book, she is, unusually compassionate when it comes to his excesses and his self-indulgence. And he was really, what's very clear reading his collected poems is that he was convinced from a very early age that he had what he calls in one poem, sort of tragically, he calls it, he calls it My Special Fate. So the line is, he's talking about a love affair. It is very confessional. It is very dishy. The whole passage in Love, and he just has a sequence of poems in Love and Fame where he's sort of writing in quatrains about all of the fun and interesting gossip of his college years. And he says toward the end of this poem about sleeping with some girl he liked, he says, "At all times loomed for me my special fate." And that special fate for him seems to be both to be great and famous and celebrated and to do major work, but also to die by suicide. And the number of images of people leaping to their deaths and even leaping from bridges to their deaths, as he did, is unnerving as you read through the collected, without even getting to the suicide references in the dream songs. So it seems to be both a sort of, both what I think of as destiny, which is the gods' plans for what you might accomplish in your life, as well as fate, which is the inescapable conclusion that faces all of us without warning, but with a kind of an inexorable certainty. So he is, I find him very annoying at times, Berryman. I reread Homage to Mistress Bradstreet a couple years ago when I read the Simpson book, because she has a wonderful chapter in there about the composition of that long poem, which was sort of seen as the poem in which Berryman found his voice. And rereading it at the time, I thought, this just feels very showy and sort of forced. Like he's insisting on a voice. And then his peers and mentors said, yes, this is an important work of our time. And they kind of all agreed on that. And it wasn't really till later that the voice he had banged out in Bradstreet became a little more supple and was put to more seemingly spontaneous and authentic use in the Dream Songs and elsewhere. Rereading Bradstreet now, it's better than I remembered. Though a lot of it does feel forced, and especially like he has a whole bonkers section where he literally goes back in time, or like his ghost goes back in time and has sex with Mistress Bradstreet. Fine, sure. But like the passages where he's actually describing her life, the passages where he describes her, her in childbirth, or her dealing with sicknesses in her family and her love for her husband and for her children, those are the moments when the poem becomes both gripping and moving, and where his formal eccentricities don't seem to get in the way of telling the story or giving voice to the character. But I thought of this again. My wife and I had a weekend away in Newbern, scenic Newbern, on the North Carolina coast. I guess it's not quite on the coast. It's on a river near the coast. It's a pretty little town. And we went, as we do in every town we visit, we went on a ghost tour. This one was not great. If you want a really good ghost tour, go to the ghost tour in Wilmington, North Carolina, and ask for Anthony. Anthony's great. Anthony is a pro. He is somebody who is part of what makes him so good at telling the stories is that, first of all, he knows them very, very well. He has been doing this for a while, and he has assimilated deep into his muscle memory not only the content of the stories, but also the most effective manner for telling them. So he's just very practiced, which is part of it, but he's also somebody who he seems really to care about the work. He cares about storytelling. He cares about ghost stories, scary stories. He's a horror movie buff. And he also is an amateur student of history. But for my money, part of what makes him really good at his job is that he seems to be sort of a broken man. I don't mean that I don't mean to say anything bad about him. I just mean that he seems to be doing some hard living and giving himself over pretty completely to the ghost tour life, while also sort of like retaining an air of someone who has to some extent given up. And it is in his like the combination, I think, of deep and hard-won facility in storytelling with a willingness not to try so hard. It just makes him a really winning and captivating storyteller. The guide we had this time, she was fine. She did a fine job. She's a history teacher. She's a drama teacher. She liked dressing up in her costume, and she had memorized her stories well enough. She needed to learn some economy in the organization of her stories, but mostly what made it a little hard to follow, and what had me playing with echo for much of the tour, was that Every sentence of every story received the same cadence, the same enunciation, the same rhythm, and ultimately the same musical conclusion, regardless of the content of each portion of each story, the pace of which never changed and the delivery of which arrived in a never faltering but sometimes inconsistent transatlantic accent. So that, it was poetry voice. It was ghost storytelling poetry voice, and it didn't. She maintained a particular manner of delivery that just had no relationship to what was being delivered, which is, I think, what happens in classic poetry voice. But it does also sometimes happen in like cool AAVE inflected spoken word poetry voice, which is becoming, increasingly the mode of the day. So, I think that that is really the thing to watch out for in any of these, in both in the vocal delivery of a poem and in the attempt at any kind of voice in writing poetry, is the resistance of the vocal manner to the subject matter or the occasion. Like that's really that's what's deadly, is when John Berryman is just having a grand old time doing the John Berryman routine while Anne Bradstreet's husband is dying of the pox. But all this sort of poetic identity crisis and agony over success or failure, both like in the work and in the life, have been on my mind in part because of a book by a poet named Bill Coyle. So in 2006, the much problematized New Criterion Prize went to a Bill Coyle, who is a member of the Powwow Poetry Workshop. I forget what they call it. Powwow Poetry Powwow. Or no, there are a number of truly notable members, including Alfred Nickel, Rena Espayet, Marianne Corbett, and our own Zara Rob. Fuck. I learned how to pronounce her first name, and then I don't remember how to pronounce her last name. Zara Rabe. At any rate, Zara is a member of the Powwow Poets as well. So Bill Coyle's book was called The God of This World to His Prophet. I read it in, I think, 2008 or 9 at the insistent recommendation of Ryan, who had happened upon it, and I think he was sort of burning through stacks of people. I mean, Ryan has always been a faster and more voracious reader than I am. I am a ruminator as a reader, but I gobbled up The God of This World to His Prophet, and I wrote Bill Coyle a fan letter afterward. My thought was, and I think I told him this at the time, like, I can't wait for your next book to come out so I can review it. And he said something, charming and self-deprecating. He did write back right away. It was a very nice guy. He was doing a degree in editing, I think. I forget. He's had a number of different academic and literary hats. And he also has translated the work of Håkan Sandal, who is a Swedish poet, a contemporary Swedish poet, published a whole book of his poems. But The God of This World to His Prophet is something special. And I was talking to another poet recently about what a mark this made, that everybody who read it, who didn't already know Bill Coyle, said, like, oh shit, what is this? Like, this is not just your average, like, serviceable formal verse. This is something sort of special. And my recollection of it, because I think it is a book with a whole lot of rhyming trimeter and or dimeter, which is devilishly hard to do, particularly in couplets, as he often has them. And my recollection was that it was this perfect crystal composition. It was this sort of flawless standalone work that would be difficult to match, let alone exceed. And so, partly I thought like, oh, well, he must just be a perfectionist who's very slowly working away at his second book. I learned recently, and I can't speak with too much certainty because I don't know, but I've heard that he has had a hard time, and I think a hard time in sort of the usual way of poets, which is feeling neglected by readers and lost as a writer and hopeless as an artist. I don't know, I can't say anything about his mental health, but he sounded really fucking depressed based on what I heard, which is no unfamiliar, like that's a very familiar condition for poets, for me as well. And I think being someone who has and who continues to agonize over these same things and feel a lot of the same fear and insecurity that again, like at second hand, I was hearing that Bill had gone through. My heart went out to him. And so I decided I wanted to devote a little bit of time to this book. I reread it recently, and it was an interesting experience because it was different than I remembered. I mean, much of it was very, very impressive. I have, by the way, like one poem I talked about from the very beginning of this podcast, Coyle, which is in this book. I won't even really get into it today because I've talked about it a couple times in the podcast. It's an excellent poem and well worth going back to, but there's so many other good poems in this extremely slender and spare book. There are just so many standout poems that I will leave Coyle to one side. But going back through it, like there were certainly the poems I remembered as being these sort of sparkling shards of glass, these perfect cutting instruments. But the book was also like jokier than I remembered, and talkier, and more motley. Like it is in the old Dante, and he brings in Dante at one point. There is another poem I won't talk about today, called Contra Dante, kind of. Gets a really thorough and lovely treatment in an episode of Versecraft. Elijah spends a lot of time with it. Another great little poem. So he brings in Dante here, but Dante, his vision of comedy was that it was impure, that among the qualities that define tragedy was purity of quality, kind, purpose. And comedy was not so much that it arrived at a happy ending as it was that it incorporated a mix of stuff. And this book is much more of a comedy in that sense than I remembered. I mean, both because it is funnier and lighter, but also it's just he throws in stuff that doesn't necessarily match anything. There's a dramatic monologue called Pacific that tells us sort of like an upsetting and indelible story about the war in the Pacific during World War II. And I don't think it's one of the 10 best books in the poem. Sorry, I don't think it's one of the 10 best poems in the book, but like it's a notable poem and it doesn't really match anything else in there. He has poems where he makes like jokes about squirrels in a way like dad joke style jokes about squirrels, and like some of it I kind of cringe at, some of it is actually funny, but it's so far from being the singular thing I remember. He's also like much more interested in religion, in a more sincere way than I had remembered, though also never without some skepticism. So I simultaneously came away from returning to this book thinking like, well, it's a less perfect book than I remembered, but also like that it's more promising. That rather than having achieved his one true cri de coeur with this book, he had written a first book by a very talented and skilled poet who who wrote, I think, some absolute keepers, some poems that should be, if they are not already, widely anthologized, but also explored a number of possibilities and possible ways that he could branch out in his next books. And I don't know how Bill's poetry writing is going these days, but I'm hopeful, because it's a terrific book, but even more so, it is evidence of a terrific poet, and one who is kind of like Maury Creech, like not satisfied just to do the one thing and do it well, but seems to be a little restless. After he followed this up with a book of translations, as I said, he seems to want to keep searching out new ground, because he does write a handful of poems in here that are just little perfect compositions that they are perfect versions of themselves, but a lot more poems are something more. I mean, there are times when he almost verges on Billy Collins, in his talkiness, but then the very crispness of the diction and the unforgiving shape of the form will add an extra dimension to what would otherwise just be an exercise in rhetoric. The other thing I noticed reading through this, I noticed I stole a fucking line from him. Like the first poem in my first book, the last line of that, or not the last line, but one of the later lines in that poem, I realized I got it from his book, from his poem. It's his squirrel poem. It's not my favorite poem in the book, but he has this little moment, what careful small gray creatures, how like man. And that's effectively a line from a poem I wrote just would have been like a year or two after reading this, of course, without at all remembering it at the time. But one of the other themes that I had forgotten that runs through this book is the anxiety of being a writer, being an artist, and in struggling and failing to write a poem to my artist friends myself, I came upon a couple of really good poems to artist friends, or poems about being an artist, in here. This is maybe my favorite, and it is just it's just a killer. It's a killer as a lyric, but it's also a killer as a piece of subject matter. So this is Disaster, and it is addressed to a friend. There's a famous Yeats poem called To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Nothing, and it's comforting a friend whose play received bad reviews and closed early, and so all of his work on that play was wasted. But Yeats says, in a place of stone, be secret and exult, because of all things known, that is most difficult. Just like, not really true and not very comforting, but at least has a sort of a Yeatsian ring of austere Irish manliness about it. This is a very different kind of poem, a poem addressed to a failure, a different kind of failure. So he's writing to a friend who is I think an artist. It could be different, but I believe he's writing to an artist, and my assumption is he's writing to another poet. He begins with a line taken from Thomas Campion's poem "Now Winter Nights Enlarge," which is a great weird little poem. Now winter nights enlarge, and this is Thomas Campion, who was a almost perfect contemporary of Shakespeare's. He was born slightly later and died a few years later and died a few years later. Now winter nights enlarge. Now winter nights enlarge the number of their hours, and clouds their storms discharge upon the airy towers. So we're approaching the winter solstice. It's getting darker. Let now the chimneys blaze and cups o'erflow with wine. Let well-turned words amaze with harmony divine. Now yellow waxen lights shall wait on honey love, while youthful revels, masks, and courtly sights sleep's leaden spells remove. So we're going to be partying in the dark this winter. This time doth well dispense with lovers' long discourse. Much speech hath some defence, though beauty no remorse. All do not all things well. Some measures comely tread, some knotted riddles tell, some poems smoothly read. So this is maybe his own categorization of poets. All do not all things well. Some measures comely tread, some knotted riddles tell, some poems smoothly read. The summer hath his joys, and winter his delights. Though love and all his pleasures are but toys, they shorten tedious nights. That is a nice move with the penultimate line in both of those stanzas, those not mirrored stanzas, but duplicate stanzas in their form. With the extra 2 feet in the penultimate line gives sort of an extra sweetness to the envoy, or not technically an envoy, but the short last line, particularly, though love and all his pleasures are but toys, they shorten tedious nights. This isn't an episode about Thomas Campion, but Bill uses that line, all do not all things well. And this is another reason I think he is talking to a poet here. All do not all things well. And there are few things more thankless than trying to tell a friend he hasn't got an ounce of talent for the work nearest his heart. Right? There's no benefit. You will gain nothing by telling your friend that he is just no good at the thing he wants to do. All do not all things well, and there are few things more thankless than trying to tell a friend he hasn't got an ounce of talent for the work nearest his heart, which is why I was not straight with you from the start. This is an apologia, if not an apology. This is, it's like when your friend, gets a very intense but clearly batshit new girlfriend, and you have to be careful about criticizing her. You have to be careful about being too honest with him, because he could end up married to her, and then you are on record saying he should break up with her. So this is, similarly, he doesn't want to have to go through arguing with his friend about his talentlessness in this area that matters so much to him. And so instead, he just does what most of us do most of the time in these situations, and he lies. All do not all things well, and there are few things more thankless than trying to tell a friend he hasn't got an ounce of talent for the work nearest his heart, which is why I was not straight with you from the start. An asteroid on a course. There's a great T. Craigeson Boyle story called Chicxulub, in which he just juxtaposes 2 stories, one about a family getting a phone call in the middle of the night from an ER about their daughter, and the story of an asteroid headed to Earth to wipe out all of mankind. And here we have kind of a similar juxtaposition. We have this opening stanza about the friend and not being honest with him, and then we have the second stanza begins with an asteroid headed for Earth. An asteroid on a course for Earth, caught early enough, could, with a hint of force and a good dose of math, be steered fatefully off. This is like that movie everybody hated, Don't Look Up, right? If you got it early on, maybe we can do something about it, but you can't wait too long if that asteroid's headed right for us. An asteroid on a course for Earth, caught early enough, could, with a hint of force and a good dose of math, be steered fatefully off. These next few lines are just kill me. Once a word to you might have changed your path. Now what can I do? Now it is too late. Now the course you've chosen has all the power of fate. And if I pointed out you're bound for a collision with the reality of who you are, I doubt you'd hear me or agree. You are both asteroid and shadowed impact zone, and neither can avoid the crash that's on its way. And I, who might have known, who knew how this would end, am not about to say anything now, my friend. That now it is too late. Now the course you've chosen has all the force of fate. Right? You've been doing this long enough that it feels like your destiny. It feels like what you're supposed to do. You can't do anything else. And at this point, you couldn't do anything else because you've been doing this too long. You made the mistake too long ago and you stuck with it. And Bill, your friend, didn't bother to speak up when he should have. I think about, like, this was part of the thing, reading the Berryman, is like, Berryman has a lot of bad poems in that collected. And there are plenty of bad dream songs too, but he also has some really good poems. Like, he has some keepers. He has a lot of, like, not a lot, but like he has enough serious keepers that in fact he wasn't wrong entirely about his special fate. The thing is, that was just a coincidence. Like, I'm convinced that lots of people have that exact same feeling with no special fate attendant. Right? He could just as easily have had no talent and yet experienced the same feeling of, simultaneous doom and destiny approaching, which is what's happened to Bill Coyle's friend here. You are both asteroid and shadowed impact zone, and neither can avoid the crash that's on its way. And I, who might have known, who knew how this would end, am not about to say anything now, my friend. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about our tour guide. And like, as I was trying to go through in my mind, like, what made her so much less good at this than our old friend Anthony in Wilmington? And like, part of it is like, well, maybe she's just not that good at it, and maybe he's just talented. Like, he also seems a little bit tormented. He seems like he's had some real pain and disappointment, and she seems maybe younger and a little bit greener. And so maybe some of it's manner, maybe some of it's style, maybe some of it's age, but like, maybe he's just good at this and she's just not. And, here we are, a lot of us dreaming that we're Berryman. I mean, hopefully sans suicide, though, who knows. And maybe we're not Berryman at all. Maybe we're just Bill Coyle's disastrous friend. There's so many poems in here I'm not going to have time to read. A Friend's Work. This is a very quiet one, but I think this is sort of like the happy ending through the looking glass version of the previous poem I read, Disaster. So this is A Friend's Work, and it's for Lynn Chanduk. Autumn. So he seems to be writing to another Lynn Chanduk. I guess I could look her up and find out what her story is. I mean, I'm assuming all these people are writers, but that could just be, Lynn Chanduk. She's a writer. Okay, so I was not wrong there. She won the 2006 Philip Levine Prize. Oh, so she won the same year he won for a different prize for her first manuscript, The View from Zero Bridge. How have I never heard of Lynn Chanduk? I'll have to look her up now. Yeah, I teach high school in Brooklyn, New York. Well, shit, okay. Well, maybe she will be in maybe she's in like the Josh Megan, Shane McRae poetry circle. But yeah, like I should know who this is. How the fuck do I not know this person? Anyway, all right, here's a poem praising Lynn Chanduk's poetry. All right, A Friend's Work for Lynn Chanduk. Autumn comes earlier here, and I was caught off guard when I looked up from writing and saw out in the yard how burdened the apple tree is with its golden fruit, how many already cobble the ground around its foot, how many, when the branches tremble with wind or birds, fall. Here, take this image translated into words. It's summer where you are, and nothing you can see, I imagine, is as ready a symbol as this tree, for how the work you've tended for years now ripens and, given the lightest touch, falls into your hand. It's a really unassuming poem. And again, like, this is one where I think he like flirts with Billy Collins-ness. He has nothing to prove, and he's just it's a very quotidian image of a tree in a yard. He does, it's written in short ballad meter. Short ballad meter for 4343 ABXB. And so like very familiar. This is like, I think this is Emily Dickinson's meter. This is, I think the rule is you can sing any Emily Dickinson poem to Gilligan's Island, the theme song of Gilligan's Island, because that's also in short ballad meter, short ballad stanzas. So, everything about this poem is unremarkable, but I think it is in part like the humility of the poem is part of the gift of it, because it is really a tribute. It's not, there is a great tradition, including blurbs today, of poets showing off, like you taking the occasion of praising another poem or mourning another poem sometimes in order to show off their own virtuosity. And Bill really doesn't do that here. There are a couple of, I think, nice touches. I usually resist when Ryan or Shane or Cameron or somebody likes to break a line immediately before the final word in the sentence. I really, really dislike that, but I think he does it well here. I looked up from writing and saw out in the yard how burdened the apple tree is with its golden fruit, how many already cobble the ground around its foot, how many when the branches tremble with wind or birds, comma, line break, fall. And then here, take this image. So it's, we see the fruit fall after the line break. There's literally a break, and then it lands alone on its own, and then he picks it up. Here, take this image, translate it into words. This is the medium I have to offer you. It's not an actual image. It's not an actual apple. It's just this very simple, very humble, very conventional image. It's not an actual apple. It's not an actual vision. It's just words, humble, conventional words presenting a very familiar and yet effective image. It's summer where you are, and nothing you can see, I imagine, is as ready a symbol as this tree. And so he does all of this work of putting together this unassuming poem truly for her benefit. This is one of the few convincing tribute poems that doesn't seem ultimately to glorify the poet more than the subject. But I think that the end is quite nicely handled for how the work you've tended for years now ripens. And again, it's an otherwise awkward line break. For years now ripens and, comma, given the lightest touch, a little interjection, a little hesitation. It's sort of like when you are handling very ripe fruit, part of how you know that it's ready to be eaten is that it will come off of the tree or off of the vine, off of the bush with just the slightest tug. You don't want to have to wrestle it off, but you also don't want it, falling off and being, mushed and eaten and mealy on its own. You want it to have just have that little bit of resistance and that inaudible little give between your fingertips. And that's what this, I think he conveys with this line break. For how the work you've tended for years now ripens and, given the lightest touch, falls into your hand. And, a very quiet maneuver there, but he drops a foot in the last line. It's a little more abrupt than we expect. Just like the last line of "So we'll go no more roving." It's that little, things arrive a little sooner than we thought they would, which is often how, that experience. I'm thinking of picking blueberries up in the mountains. So this is by no means a big impressive poem. I imagine it's one that Cameron will have no patience for, but I just think it's an extraordinarily humane and still quite skillful and tender poem that seems, I find pretty sincerely moving. Like, it makes me actually interested in Lynn Chanduk now, because she seemed worth doing this for. The Soundman's Funeral is a poem about a soundman's funeral, and it is just as gimmicky as you expected, and then somehow he manages to make it moving. He also uses a device Donald Justice used frequently in his poems, which was he would rhyme a word with itself, but in a stanza in which other words were rhymed with themselves, or he would just have, like one pair that was the same word rhymed with itself and others that were conventional rhymes. And this is, in this case, a perfect device for the subject matter, because he's talking about a man who produced sounds artificially that matched the sounds of the things that he was meaning to suggest in the movie soundtrack. So, frying bacon for the sound of falling rain and so forth. I won't read that because, again, there's so much here. Pacific, I mentioned. Improvisation, like almost like willfully dumb poem about a figure of speech. When we say so and so must be spinning in the grave, we say when something we think so and so would have been horrified by happens, though common sense tells us most don't have the room to actually rotate in the tomb. And you think, like, really, you're going to write a whole poem talking about how this figure of speech doesn't make sense? But then he ends up following through until he takes it to a place where, like, the end of the poem feels both like there's like genuine self-accusation and a deep bitterness and cynicism about politics and history. Like he kind of backs his way into an actually sort of like dark and upsetting poem by way of like a dumb joke, which like that's part of what's really impressive about this book is like that I don't, I think Elijah made a good point when he said that too many contemporary formalist poets take Larkin and Hausman as their primary and sometimes only models, so that there are too many poems we can see and recognize the goodness of that have nothing that contain no surprises. There was the line that Ashley quoted of Auden's when he said that if you finish a poem and you know right away and you're happy with it right away, that tells you it's self-imitation. That tells you this is ground you've already trodden. And Bill makes moves here I would never make, that I feel uneasy with, like these jokey moves or these theological moves. I'll read the very first poem and the very last poem, and then I'll sign off. But the first poem is the title poem, "The God of this world to his prophet." And, the model is, of course, the God of Abraham speaking to his prophet Abraham, or any of the other judges and prophets that follow Abraham, or including maybe, depending on your tradition, Muhammad. But the God of this world is not the God of Abraham. The God of this world is, it's never specified here, but at least the tradition I grew up with is that the God of this world is one of the names of Satan. If God is the God of the next world, if, Jesus tells his followers to look beyond, look to the next world, the heavenly kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, rather, then this world is the world of temptation. This is the fallen world. And so the God of this world is not the God to listen to. The God to listen to is the God beyond. As I have said plenty of times, I question this wisdom. But Bill does too. In the poem Contradante, as Elijah talks about, he sort of praises the earthly paradise. And he says, like, I actually would sort of rather, if I could have my druthers, I wouldn't go to heaven. I would live out more of this life with maybe less suffering and more consistently good company. So, I kind of enjoy that when he calls this the God of this world. It doesn't feel squarely and merely to be the voice of the devil. It seems to be a voice with a different kind of, a voice of more ambiguous provenance and purpose. But just as the God of Abraham is frequently telling his prophets to go yell at the rich people and the comfortable people and tell them to repent and to do like Nathan goes to David and tells him to go throw himself down in the mud and flog himself and suffer and deny himself his daily pleasures in order to make himself right with God. And of course, the Christian martyrs are great practitioners of self-flagellation. This prophet starts with a similar, or this God starts with a similar message to his prophet, but it maybe takes a slightly different turn. The God of this world to his prophet. And this is written in trimeter couplets, which is just excruciatingly hard to write. Quick note to Elijah, because he did a David Yezi poem recently that had a fair amount of, if memory serves, I think it was pentameter, trimeter, and dimeter, I believe. And Elijah came up with some elaborate scansion for some of these stanzas. I think the shorter the line, the more flexible the meter would be my rule of thumb. If you're writing, particularly if you're writing trimeter or dimeter, there is effectively no difference, I would say. I mean, not no difference, but like there is a vanishing difference. There is a rapidly shrinking difference between accentual syllabic trimeter and accentual trimeter. Like I think that the Yezi poem by My Lights is really written in something more like a modified system of strong stresses. And I don't think you end up, I think Elijah ended up shifting the feet from one line to another and having a number of kind of radical changes. I think it's actually fairly consistent, but it's just that when the lines get shorter, the meter gets looser. And that's certainly the case here, but it's still pretty damn spring tight. All right, the God of this world to his prophet. Go to the prosperous city, for I have taken pity on its inhabitants, who drink and feast and dance all night in lighted halls, yet know their bacchanals lead nowhere in the end. Go to them now, commend to those with ears to hear a lifestyle more austere. Tell all my children tired of happiness desired and never had that there is solace in despair. Say there is consolation in ruins and ruination beneath a harvest moon that is itself a ruin. Comfort, however cold, in grievances recalled, beside a fire dying from lack of love and trying. So initially it could almost be a Christian or a Hebrew prophet saying, let's bring down the high and mighty and teach them some humility. But the turn is not, you're seeking happiness in the wrong place. The turn is, well, you're seeking happiness and that's your mistake. You will find more comfort in giving up all hope and embracing ruin and failure, in giving up altogether, which is sort of a diabolical message, but also one that is not quite so tidily categorized as one might think. The God of this world to his prophet. That's part of why I come back to this poem, because I find its voice convincing. It's also obviously, like, it's written in such a way that you can clearly see the flaws. I mean, he calls out ears to hear, a lifestyle more austere. He seems to be nodding to Christian ascetic tradition. He identifies the bacchanals, right? The feasts of the Bacchae, the worshippers of Bacchus, famously wild, hedonistic, violent feasts. And his message is one that almost nobody openly, consciously, enthusiastically embraces. That is, give up. Don't try. So it's, I think like it's easy to read this poem and say, I see ironically how the speaker is incorrect, but also it's pretty beguiling. And it is not at all clear to me that the people the God of this world is admonishing his prophet to chastise. It's not at all clear to me that those people are in the right. It seems to me that it may be that no one's in the right here. I'll read it one more time. The God of this world to his prophet. Go to the prosperous city, for I have taken pity on its inhabitants, who drink and feast and dance all night in lighted halls, yet know their bacchanals lead nowhere in the end. Go to them now. Commend to those with ears to hear a lifestyle more austere. Tell all my children tired of happiness desired and never had that there is solace in despair. Say there is consolation in ruins and ruination beneath a harvest moon that is itself a ruin. Comfort, however cold, in grievances recalled, beside a fire dying from lack of love and trying. I just noticed this most recent time, tell all my children. So this is, whatever kind of God this is, he is one who looks with some what seems to be sincere care or possessiveness on the children of men, and gives them what wisdom he can. All right, last poem in the book, very, very short, and this is one that definitely lodged in my mind as soon as I read it. This is a very, very short poem, Demeter, and like real spare Demeter. It's called Obad, which of course traditionally is a poem of lovers greeting the dawn, and often greeting the dawn unhappily, or the dawn is the moment the lovers have to part. The great famous example of this is the scene in Romeo and Juliet, where after having said, what light through yonder window breaks, it is the east and Juliet is the sun, Juliet tells Romeo that it is not the sun in the morning when they've spent the night together. It's not the sun. It's a comet. That's why the sky is getting bright. You don't have to leave yet. Let's let the night last a little longer. There's no obvious love or lover here. There is just a suggestion of loss and a suggestion of hope or promise. It is a poem that is so elegant it is almost not there at all. And yet it is pretty hard to forget. A.B. Demeter Quatrains. This is Obad. On a dead street, in a high wall, a wooden gate I don't recall ever seeing open is today, and I who happen to pass this way, in passing glimpse a garden lit by dark lamps at the heart of it. Dark lamps. A dead street in a high wall, a wooden gate I don't recall ever seeing open is today, and I who happen to pass this way, in passing glimpse a garden lit by dark lamps at the heart of it. It's just the most trivial of passing sights. Like so much in this book, it's utterly quotidian, and yet it is framed so skillfully and with such restraint that it leaves a mark. Just that and Obad, is this dawn? Is this the promise of dawn? Is this the threat of dawn? The other great famous late modern Obad is Larkin's Obad, which is of course about watching the the light in the window slowly, the window curtain slowly turned gray, that gray square of early morning light after spending a night tipsily staring into the dark, filled with the horror of death. So that's probably in our mind as well, reading this. On a dead street, in a high wall, a wooden gate I don't recall ever seeing open is today. And I who happen to pass this way, in passing glimpse a garden lit by dark lamps at the heart of it. It is really virtuosically skillful, and yet it's totally unshow-off. I mean, that's part of what I think is really memorable about this book, is that there's, the only places where he seems to be showing off a little bit are the dad jokes. And that almost seems to be included like as a kind of like an exercise in humility. That's not totally true, because he does have some like Wilbur-esque riddly lines. He has a Paul Guestish poem about misremembering the meaning of Loch Ness. No, like I'm already turning this into a purer book than it actually is. But it's memorable. I mean, and there are, Sleeper. Yeah, he has a poem about the poet being like a spy. It reminds me of those early poems that Nick Laird wrote about in Auden's first book or two, in which he talks about being a spy, and it's kind of a figure for being gay. But here, Sleeper, this is the poet who is at once, I mean, he doesn't say it's the poet, but I read it as the poet. He goes through his life seemingly sincerely devoted to those around him, to normal human things that normal humans care about, and that he seems to as well, and maybe does come to care about. But ultimately, he is devoted to something that he sees as being beyond all that, and for which he is willing to cut everybody's throat. This is Sleeper. The signal might come at any time, they said. This is like the spy waiting for the signal. I think of those Soviet spies who were those long-term sleeper agents that were discovered, that they based that TV series on. The signal might come at any time, they said, adding that he would know it when it came. Again, that Berryman, my special fate. The signal might come at any time, they said, adding that he would know it when it came. He dreams of it while lying awake in bed. A phone call. Someone whispering his real name. Someone whispering his real name. It's like the normal life is not enough. I'm really the son of a king. I'm not this farmer's son. He dreams of it while lying awake in bed. A phone call, someone whispering his real name, then the instructions, where to go and when, what to do when he gets there, and to whom. Then the resulting revolution. Then at long last his return in triumph home. How desperately he cherishes the sense, fading now, of being set above, by virtue of his special circumstance, the very people he pretends to love, any of whom, on any given day, he would be more than willing to betray. Right? The writer both thinks of himself as belonging to a tradition that transcends ordinary human relationships, but also betrays those around him in a more sordid and immediate sense, by writing down their secrets, by telling the stories about those around him, by using everything as material. Every writer is a vampire. And that's true here. Although this one, I think of that poet, he was writing to in a disaster, right? Because part of what this is about is being willing to do anything for your work. But the other thing this is about is maybe being a total fraud, is maybe that signal was never coming, and you've just convinced yourself it's there. You've convinced yourself you have this other name, you have this other destiny. But all of those people you have preemptively betrayed, they're the only people who are ever going to be there for you. Although maybe like Bill, they have not told you the truth. They have not told you you should have given up the game decades ago. All right, one more time. This is Sleeper. The signal might come at any time, they said, adding that he would know it when it came. He dreams of it while lying awake in bed. A phone call, someone whispering his real name. Then the instructions. Where to go. Then the instructions. Where to go and when. What to do when he gets there and to whom. Then the resulting revolution. Then at long last his return in triumph home. How desperately he cherishes the sense, fading now, of being set above, by virtue of his special circumstance, the very people he pretends to love, any of whom, on any given day, he would be more than willing to betray. So do go read this book, The God of This World to His Prophet by Bill Coyle, published by Ivan R.D.'s. Is that the name of this weird press? Ivan R.D., the press that does all the New Criterion prizes. Read it in a, circulate a PDF of it and send $10 to Bill, or buy a real copy. However send a middle finger to Roger Kimball if you like, but read this book. But more importantly, I don't know. I'm not an actual friend of Bill's. I have, what's the Ruthke line? Having no rights in this matter, neither father nor lover. Having no rights in this matter, neither mentor nor drinking buddy. I guess I just say, Bill, I'm not going to tell you not to be depressed. I'm not going to tell you not to despair. I'm not going to tell you that all of this shit, all of this poetry world shit doesn't suck. But I will tell you, this is a real book. This is a good book. I'm very grateful for this book. And come back. Come back, Bill. We were not pulling your leg. We were not humoring you. We were not just being nice and holding our tongues. We meant it. You were not a fraud. You were the real deal. And it's not too late. All right, that is this week's show. Please do join us at the at Jack and Jill's. What is it? Dick and Jane's Cocktail Bar on Adelphi Street in Brooklyn. The evening of Wednesday the 20th. Or just send me a message at sleerickets@gmail.com. I'm in Brooklyn for the week, basically. So come say hi. Lynn Chanduk, maybe drop by. You exist and you seem to be a good poet and somebody worth knowing. So it would be great to meet you too. Oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to do a secret show episode this week. I was going to try to record 2 in 1 tonight, but this has gone long, and I think I may just try to record in my hotel room, or maybe I'll do like a big double header next week or something. I don't know. There may be no secret show episode this weekend, and maybe I'll just do like something big and juicy. I'll do like 2 at once next week. I have a bunch of really good stuff in the can still, including a delicious new episode with Alexis Sears, where we talk about an infuriating poetry movie. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.